From a high-energy goal call on Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi, a moment that went viral, especially among Pittsburgh fans.
Okay, so that's top speed right there.
It has been a remarkable and unlikely path for Harnarayan Singh. It started in Brooks, Alberta. He loved hockey and broadcasting.
I've always wanted to do this. This is a dream come true.
But was told a man with a turban was a long shot to get on sports television. Harnarayan proved those people wrong.
Harnarayan Singh.
The Vancouver Canucks with a gutsy comeback victory to close out this series against the Minnesota Wild.
He's embraced both hockey and his heritage as he writes in his new book. And as you can see, when he tried to teach some Calgary Flames some Punjabi hockey terms.
Maria shot, kita goal.
Oh, that is beautiful.
And Harnarayan Singh joins us now from Calgary. How are you?
Doing well, Ian.
I'm guessing a lot of people who are watching haven't watched Hockey Night in Canada in Punjabi. So what would you say to them has been the accomplishment of that program?
It's tough to say just one because there's been so many achievements, but I think first and foremost, growing the game at a grassroots level. We've heard from so many families who've put their kids into minor hockey because they've become fans of the game through the show, but also having 3 generations sit together, and it's a Saturday tradition now where grandparents and grandkids are sitting together and they're all fans of the game because it's available to them in Punjabi. And then representation, I would say as well, for a person like myself and my colleagues, for us to get our foot into the door in terms of the hockey broadcasting world, it was only possible through something like Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi.
Not surprisingly, Punjabi is not filled with terms for ice hockey, so you and your colleagues had to actually come up with a bit of a vocabulary. We saw that in a little bit of that in the segment earlier. So I want to talk about a couple of those terms and tell me the story behind them. Penalty box, for example.
Yeah, well, our show, we're much more enthusiastic and we like to have a lot of fun. And I like to say we add the spice or the masala to the hockey commentary.
Dallas Stars, 1-0.
And so instead of penalty box, we converted into Saja da Dabba, which translates back into English as box of punishment. And there's a lot of fun terms we've created, like Japered shot, a slap to the face, and made it a hybrid with shot there. So, and those have been really popular within the community.
Tell me about bad period. I like that term you came up with.
Bad period. Well, you know, when the team's coming back from a bad period, we like to say they need to have a cup of chai, right? You need that tea, that caffeine to keep you going, as most East Indians have every day.
So we saw the segment with the Calgary Flames players who were trying their hand at some of those terms. I want to play another segment of you talking to Flames players.
Well, who do you think looks the most Punjabi? This is the short list.
How Stajan's on that list, I have no idea. He's the exact opposite, but it's got to be G. It's got to be. Yeah. I mean, he has the flow there. Usually keeps it a little shorter than that, but I mean, he could grow a beard in about 6 hours, I think, and shave him twice a day probably.
So there you're asking Flames players, which player looks the most Punjabi? I kind of think 20 years ago, somebody wouldn't have gone in a dressing room and done a segment like that, or it might have been a bit awkward. How have players reacted to you and your questions and bits like that?
You're right, Ian, that we've come a long way. And I think that most NHL hockey players, especially in Canada, they know about Hockey Night Punjabi. They know what we're about. And they also realize that we have to be doing a lot more as a sport to grow the game and to introduce this game to other communities. So when you look at it from that angle, they've mostly been very welcoming. And as time goes on, NHL players realize that there has to be more going on in terms of social media and video production and this type of thing. So the players, for the most part, have been very welcoming.
Yeah, they were fantastic in that segment. But you say for the most part, we don't want to dwell on the negativity, but there must have been some rough times for you.
I mean, there's been, in terms of specific players, there's been some comments sometimes on social media, but especially more, I would just say in the general public, we've had to kind of initially for Hockey Night Punjabi prove why this is so important. And there's been times where people say that why not just have it in English? Well, there's a need here for this, and it's become a want as well, because the community is growing so much. As I like to say, the changing face of Canada, that's what we're seeing nowadays, and we want the game to grow and flourish. So that's part and parcel with it.
So you started your career in small town radio in Brooks, Alberta, in high school, and I some parallels with what I did in small town Nova Scotia many years before. But big difference with you. You have a turban, you have a beard, you wanted to get into sports, and you had people, even well-meaning people, tell you that probably wasn't a place that was going to be very welcoming. How did you feel when you heard that?
Well, it was something I actually got used to, because I had to continually justify myself as a Canadian. And you say well-intentioned, I've had people come up and tell me in my life, welcome to Canada. And, it's just this assumption that because I look so different, or our community looks so different, we're new here. But those types of discouraging remarks that I wouldn't find a place in sports television because there wasn't any diversity in sports television when I was growing up. Those were difficult times, and there are moments that I really remember, but I was very lucky to have moments of encouragement right after that. Like my small town, Brooks, Alberta, the radio station gave me an opportunity to do high school news and sports there. And then I did post-secondary and eventually got on with Hockey Night in Canada. So there was also encouraging moments that came up right after the discouraging ones.
We're at a moment of reckoning in society, but in sports as well, when it comes to racial justice, right? The NBA has embraced it. The NHL, some players would suggest, maybe has struggled with it a little bit. What's your view of how the league is dealing with that issue?
Well, I think there's a sign that's we're going in the right direction. And I think why that is because players, teams, and the league are now taking a stand, despite the fact that they're actually alienating some of their fan base who don't want us to be talking about these issues. And I think the fact that we're still having this conversation within the sports world, it's a good sign, because we need to have these conversations in order to make progress in society and in humanity. And it's not marrying politics with the world of sports. This is just talking about the basic human rights of respect for one another. And normally you've seen players of color, players of diversity that have had to take the stand, but we're finally seeing other players of the majority also take a strong stance on this. And I think that's what's really going to help us.
Harnder Ryan, I know the proper answer to this took a whole book to write, but in a couple of paragraphs, what's your story?
I would say my story is one about defying the odds. And, when I was told that because of my how I look, my appearance, and because of me being from a small town, I wouldn't be, able to have this dream come to fruition where I'm a part of the hockey broadcasting world. But my message to people out there is, if I can do it, you can achieve whatever your hopes and goals and dreams are. And we're especially very lucky to be in Canada where these opportunities are available to us. The book is also about Canada's multiculturalism, where you're able to use the power of sport and music to, it's a nation building process where it brings people together. And I would tell you, Ian, that my entire experience growing up in Canada would have been drastically different had it not been for the power of sport and for hockey in Canada. And that's my message, is that, it does bring us together, and we are in a beautiful country, the best one in the world, and my story proves it.
All right, Harnder Ryan, really nice speaking with you.
Thanks so much, Ian.